Comrades, awaken. Look around you. The factory hums, the office flickers with screens, the stores overflow with goods. But who owns the wealth produced in this ceaseless labor? It is not you, the tireless worker, the mind behind the machine, the pulse of society. No, it is those who neither toil nor sweat, who sit atop the gilded towers of capital, counting profits as if human lives were mere numbers. You feel replaceable, because in the eyes of this system you are. Yet, paradoxically, the system could not exist without you. It is a cruel irony, a calculated deception of the ruling class. They need you to survive, yet they tell you that you can be easily substituted. This is the lie of capitalism, and it is high time we expose it. The notion of your replaceability is not a truth of nature, but a truth manufactured by the bourgeoisie. It is embedded in every wage, every contract, every performance metric, designed to reduce human beings to commodities. The system trains you to accept your disposability, to fear unemployment as a personal failure, to internalize your own subjugation. But hear me clearly. You are not expendable. Your labor is the source of all value. The wealth of nations rests upon your hands, your intellect, your strength. Yet the ruling class convinces you otherwise, for in your self-doubt lies their power. Observe the machinery of capitalism, the endless cycle of hiring and firing, automation and outsourcing. Each act is a weapon against your solidarity, a calculated strategy to make you doubt your own indispensability. They whisper that without you, the system survives. And yet every crisis, every shortage, every collapse of profit reminds us that the system cannot endure without the very labor it seeks to devalue. This contradiction is the lifeblood of class struggle. The proletariat is simultaneously the backbone and the pawn of the capitalist order. Comrades, the fear of replaceability is a tool to fragment us, to weaken our collective strength. It is a doctrine designed to isolate, demoralize, and subjugate. But we know that the power lies not with the owners of capital, but with the workers who produce it. The machinery of production, the networks of knowledge, the engines of commerce, all these are under your control, collectively. Without your labor, the golden palaces of the few crumble to dust. Without your intellect, their schemes of profit are impotent. Without your organized resistance, exploitation continues unchecked. But with your unity, revolution becomes inevitable. The time has come to act, to tear the veil of false necessity from our eyes. Organize in factories, offices, and streets. Build unions, councils, and associations that wield collective power. Recognize that your expendability is an illusion and that your solidarity is the greatest threat to the capitalist order. Demand your rights, assert your human dignity, and refuse the notion that your life and labor are mere instruments to the enrichment of the few. Do not seek permission from the ruling class to be acknowledged. Do not ask for charity where justice is owed. Seize it. In every strike, every protest, every act of solidarity, you reclaim the truth that the system cannot survive without you. You are essential not because they recognize it, but because the material conditions of society proclaim it. The capitalists may call you replaceable, but history calls you revolutionary. Rise, comrades, feel the fire of your indispensability. Let it transform your fear into courage, your anxiety into action, and your labor into liberation. Unite, for when the workers recognize their collective power, the illusions of replaceability dissolve, and the chains of exploitation shatter. The system that pretends to need you will tremble before the organized strength of the masses, and from the ruins of oppression a new world will emerge, just equitable, and truly human. The capitalist system functions under a veil of contradictions, a structure built on the illusion that the worker is expendable, while simultaneously relying entirely on that worker for its survival. This contradiction is not accidental, nor is it a mere byproduct of human inefficiency. It is the intentional architecture of a system designed to exploit, subjugate, and extract the maximum value from human labor while minimizing the cost to the ruling class. From the moment a worker enters the industrial arena, they are indoctrinated with the notion that their role is replaceable, that the machine of commerce and profit could continue seamlessly without their individual contribution. Advertisements, corporate rhetoric, and the cultural mythology of meritocracy reinforce the idea that one's value is measured solely by productivity, output, and compliance, while the intrinsic worth of human labor is systematically diminished. Yet every product created, every service rendered, every bit of surplus value generated emerges directly from the efforts of the worker. The factories, offices, and fields do not flourish by chance, nor does the circulation of commodities occur spontaneously. It is the coordinated, organized, and relentless labor of the proletariat that fuels the engine of capitalism. The system survives because the worker produces the conditions for its existence, from raw materials to finished goods, from intellectual contributions to physical toil. It is the laborer who makes the wheels turn, who keeps the market alive, who sustains the wealth of those who claim ownership over capital, property, and means of production. And yet the worker is constantly reminded that they are replaceable, that another hand, another mind, another body could easily fill their place. This illusion of disposability serves a strategic purpose. It enforces obedience, discourages dissent, and creates competition among workers themselves, fragmenting potential solidarity. By convincing the laborer that their position is easily usurped, the system installs fear and uncertainty, compelling workers to accept low wages, extended hours, and exploitative conditions under the guise of scarcity and necessity. It is a psychological mechanism as much as an economic one. The worker internalizes the message of dispensability, measuring their value against arbitrary standards imposed by those who profit from their labor, rather than recognizing their true role as the generator of wealth. Every time a worker doubts their indispensability, they reinforce the power of the capitalist, willingly participating in the very system that oppresses them. Yet this contradiction remains glaringly apparent to those who study the machinery of production and wealth accumulation. Without the worker, the capitalist has nothing. The gold, the profits, the dividends, and the luxuries enjoyed by the ruling class exist solely because of labor rendered. Factories remain idle without workers to operate. Machinery. Offices become voids without employees to execute tasks. Markets stagnate without labor to generate goods and services. The narrative of replaceability masks an uncomfortable truth. The system is dependent upon those it seeks to minimize. Historical events, economic crises, and social movements consistently reveal this truth. Strikes, labor shortages, and organized resistance demonstrate that when workers withdraw their labor, the supposed inevitability of capital accumulation falters, production slows, and the ruling class experiences the fragility of a system that pretends to operate independently of the laborer. In these moments, the fallacy of disposability is laid bare, exposing the illusion propagated through years of ideological conditioning. The workers' hands and minds are not merely functional, they are foundational. They embody the collective energy, creativity, and effort that capitalism exploits while attempting to deny the worker recognition of their power. The system's survival is inseparable from the existence of the working class, yet the worker is kept in a state of dependence and self-doubt, unaware of the critical leverage they wield. It is only through consciousness, through understanding the mechanisms of exploitation and the centrality of labor, that the worker can begin to challenge the narrative imposed upon them. Education, collective action, and solidarity reveal the truth that the seeming dispensability of the worker is a myth, a social construct deliberately maintained to suppress rebellion, to ensure the continuous flow of surplus value, and to perpetuate the illusion of hierarchy and control. Once the worker recognizes their indispensable role, they also recognize their potential to transform society, to assert control over the means of production, and to demand equitable distribution of wealth. Every hour of labor, every task performed, every creative endeavor contributes not to the worker's wealth, but to the accumulation of capital for the ruling class. And yet the worker internalizes the idea that their absence would go unnoticed. This perception is a weapon, a means of psychological subjugation, and a structural necessity for the maintenance of capitalism, which depends simultaneously on the indispensability and supposed replaceability of those who create its value. The contradiction is fundamental. The system cannot survive without the laborer, yet it persists in convincing the laborer of their dispensability, creating a cycle of exploitation, alienation, and false consciousness. In every workplace, every factory, every office, the workers' efforts sustain the wealth, power, and privileges of the few, even as they are told that their labor is replaceable, that their absence would make no difference, that their struggles are individual and isolated. But history, economics, and social reality all refute this narrative. The worker is not only necessary, they are central, vital, and foundational to the existence of the capitalist system. The very mechanisms of society, its production, distribution, and consumption, hinge upon the labor of those who are told they are expendable. Recognizing this is the first step toward consciousness, toward solidarity, and toward the reclamation of power by those who sustain the world while being denied acknowledgement, reward, and control. Capitalism operates not merely as an economic system, but as a sophisticated mechanism of social control, one that relies as much on ideology as on material coercion. Among its most insidious instruments is the systematic cultivation of fear within the working class, particularly the fear of disposability. From the moment a worker enters the labor market, they are conditioned to believe that their position is fragile, that their livelihood is contingent upon perfect performance, and that a single misstep could render them obsolete. This fear is not incidental. It is central to the functioning of the system. By convincing workers that they can easily be replaced, capitalism ensures a constant state of anxiety and competition among the laboring masses. Each individual, believing themselves vulnerable to substitution, internalizes the values of compliance and submission, willingly accepting low wages, long hours, and exploitative conditions. They are pitted against one another, as colleagues become competitors in a hierarchy that measures worth by productivity, obedience, and conformity, rather than by human dignity or creativity. This fragmentation is deliberate. A unified working class would pose a fundamental threat to the capitalist structure, for the system is dependent upon their labor and yet seeks to deny them the recognition of their collective power. Fear of disposability acts as a psychological lever, ensuring that the proletariat remains divided, isolated, and distracted from the realization of their indispensability. Workers scrutinize themselves incessantly, evaluating their performance, fearing unemployment, and doubting their value, all while the system continues to extract surplus value from their labor. Corporate policies, performance metrics, automation, and the rhetoric of efficiency reinforce this perception, presenting it as a natural and inevitable law of the market rather than a deliberate instrument of control. Each restructuring, downsizing, or outsourcing operation is framed not as an economic strategy to concentrate wealth in the hands of the few, but as an unavoidable adjustment to market forces. Workers internalize this narrative, often blaming themselves for conditions that are structurally imposed, believing their skills, efforts, or personal shortcomings are at fault. This internalization of blame deepens alienation, fostering a sense of individual inadequacy rather than collective injustice. In truth, the fear of disposability conceals the reality of dependence. Capitalism cannot function without the labor of the working class. Factories, offices, retail chains, and service networks all rely upon human effort, coordination, and skill. Yet the system obscures this dependence through a constant narrative of replaceability, ensuring that workers remain compliant, hesitant to challenge authority, and unwilling to unite for transformative action. The ideological control embedded in this fear extends beyond the workplace. It permeates education, social media, and popular culture, presenting the market as an unforgiving arbiter of worth, where success is individualized and competition is glorified. The worker's self-perception becomes intertwined with this market logic, creating a cycle of anxiety, self-monitoring, and compliance that reinforces the power of the ruling class. This fear is weaponized in countless ways through temporary contracts, precarious employment, performance-based bonuses, and corporate surveillance. Each mechanism is designed to remind workers of their supposed dispensability, making them cautious, pliable, and less likely to demand rights or organize collectively. Even when a worker contributes extraordinary effort or demonstrates irreplaceable skill, the system perpetuates the illusion that they are interchangeable, that the machinery of production and profit would continue unimpeded in their absence. Historical instances of labor strikes, shortages, and organized resistance expose the lie of disposability, revealing that the system's dependence on labor is absolute. When workers withhold their labor, production slows, profits diminish, and the power imbalance shifts, demonstrating that the fear of being replaceable is a manufactured vulnerability rather than an objective reality. Despite this, capitalism relentlessly cultivates the perception of disposability because it is effective at fragmenting the collective potential of the working class. Workers are divided not only by fear of replacement, but also by skill, race, gender, and social status, each division serving the same purpose, preventing solidarity. By emphasizing scarcity and competition, the system ensures that workers see one another as obstacles rather than allies, reinforcing isolation and diminishing the possibility of organized resistance. Yet the truth remains, the working class is the engine of wealth creation, and the power to challenge exploitation lies in their unity. The fear of disposability, once recognized as an ideological tool rather than an objective reality, can be transformed from a source of paralysis into a catalyst for collective action. Workers can reclaim their indispensability by organizing, asserting their rights, and refusing to internalize the narrative of expendability. The system's reliance on labor becomes a point of leverage, a means to contest and ultimately reshape the social order, and the recognition of this leverage is the first step toward consciousness, empowerment, and structural transformation. Workers' labor is the foundation upon which all value and societal wealth are constructed. Yet this truth is systematically obscured by the ideology of capitalism. From the earliest stages of production to the circulation of goods in global markets, It is human effort, skill, and ingenuity that generate the wealth consumed by society. Every commodity, every service, every material comfort originates in labor. Yet the capitalist system diverts the recognition of this contribution to those who claim ownership over capital rather than those who produce it. The bourgeoisie does not create value, they appropriate it. The worker transforms raw materials into products, performs intellectual work to innovate, organizes logistics to distribute goods, and sustains the infrastructure that allows commerce to function. Each act of labor embeds itself into the product as value, yet the worker receives only a fraction of this contribution in the form of wages, while the surplus, what Marx called surplus value, is extracted and accumulated by those who own the means of production. This extraction is not incidental. It is the very mechanism by which wealth is concentrated and the system perpetuated. The perception that value emerges from capital entrepreneurship or market forces is a deliberate obfuscation, a myth propagated to justify inequality and to keep the working class from recognizing its indispensable role. In every field, from manufacturing to services, from agriculture to technology, it is the effort of the laborer that creates measurable and intangible wealth alike. Buildings, machinery, digital infrastructure, transportation networks, and entire economies are sustained through coordinated labor, yet the system privileges ownership over contribution, rewarding those who invest capital while marginalizing those who invest their labor. Education, training, and skill develop and are harnessed not primarily for the benefit of the worker, but to increase the productivity of labor in service of capital accumulation. Every hour of toil, every ounce of mental or physical effort contributes to a system designed to enrich the few while simultaneously teaching the many to accept their limited share as natural or deserved. This imbalance is justified ideologically through notions of meritocracy, competition, and the free market, yet the reality is stark. The social and economic power of the working class is the true source of wealth. Consider the infrastructure of society. Roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, and utilities function because of labor, both skilled and unskilled. Intellectual labor produces technology, scientific advancement, and innovation that transform societies, yet the ownership of the results of this labor belongs overwhelmingly to the capitalist class, while the producers receive only a portion of the value they create. Even the most celebrated entrepreneurs, inventors, or investors rely upon collective labor to realize their profits. The value they extract is contingent upon the cooperative efforts of workers who remain obscured in the shadows of public attention. Labor produces not only material goods, but also the social relations and networks that allow society to function. Commerce, culture, communication, and governance are sustained by human effort. Without the coordinated input of countless workers, the abstract structures of civilization would collapse. The capitalist system, however, masks this reality, presenting wealth as an outcome of individual genius or capital ownership rather than social production. This concealment reinforces alienation. The worker becomes separated from the product of their labor, unable to perceive the full impact of their contribution, and left to internalize a diminished sense of worth. Why? Yet the truth persists, observable in moments of labor unrest, strikes, and systemic crisis. When workers withdraw their labor, production halts, profits decline, and the illusion of capitalist independence dissolves. Entire economies demonstrate that the wealth attributed to capital is inseparable from the labor that produces it. The laborer, in essence, is the creator of value, and any system that ignores this principle relies on deception, coercion, and exploitation to maintain stability. Recognizing this reality is not a theoretical exercise, but a practical necessity for transformation. Once the working class understands that its labor is the source of wealth, that without it the structures of society would falter, it gains the insight needed for collective action. Organization, solidarity, and assertion of labor rights become not merely defensive measures, but revolutionary tools capable of reshaping the distribution of wealth, the control of production, and the social order itself. Labor, once appreciated in its full social significance, becomes the foundation upon which justice, equality, and societal transformation can be built. Every hour worked, every skill exercised, every collaborative endeavor contributes to a society from which workers have historically been denied proportional benefit. The capitalist claim that value derives from capital is revealed as ideology, and the truth of labor's centrality illuminates the path toward reclaiming control over production, wealth, and the conditions of life. The more workers recognize their indispensable contribution, the more they perceive the leverage inherent in their collective action. Solidarity transforms labor from a mechanism of exploitation into a force for societal reorganization. An understanding that labor is the true source of value becomes the cornerstone of consciousness, empowerment, and the pursuit of equitable distribution of wealth in a system that has long sought to obscure this fundamental truth. Collective organization and solidarity are the most potent forces capable of challenging the structures of exploitation inherent in capitalism. Yet the system works tirelessly to undermine and fragment them. Throughout history, the ruling class has understood that the concentration of wealth and power relies not only on the extraction of surplus value from labor, but also on the disunity of those whose labor produces that wealth. When workers act in isolation, when each individual believes their struggle is theirs alone, the system thrives. Fear, competition, and internalized hierarchies serve to divide the working class, ensuring that collective consciousness and coordinated action remain distant possibilities rather than present realities. Capitalism cultivates this division through precarious employment, performance metrics, layoffs, and ideological indoctrination, convincing workers that cooperation is secondary to personal survival, that solidarity is a luxury they cannot afford. Yet the truth is that no worker is truly expendable, and no capitalist system can maintain stability when labor unites. Solidarity transforms dispersed, isolated grievances into collective leverage. When workers recognize that their fates are intertwined, that the withdrawal of labor or the coordination of effort can disrupt production, distribution, and profit, they acquire a power far greater than any individual bargaining position could provide. Collective organization manifests in many forms: unions, workers' councils, associations, and strikes are instruments through which laborers assert their shared interest and protect their rights against the relentless drive of capital. The system fears these structures precisely because they translate the latent power of the working class into tangible coercive force capable of demanding justice, equity, and control over the conditions of produce. Cashioned through organization, laborers begin to understand that the surplus value extracted from their work is not a natural law, but a social construction, maintained through systemic coercion and ideological manipulation. They recognize that the wealth accumulated by the few is inseparable from the coordinated effort of the many, and that only by acting collectively can they assert claims commensurate with their contribution. Strikes, slowdowns, and coordinated demands disrupt the rhythm of capitalist profit, revealing the fragility of a system that pretends to operate independently of those who sustain it. The very dependence of capital on labor becomes a weapon in the hands of the organized working class. Yet this weapon is only effective when wielded collectively, with solidarity as its guiding principle. Solidarity also functions as a shield against the psychological warfare waged by capital. By cultivating a sense of shared purpose and mutual support, workers resist the isolating pressures of fear, competition, and perceived dispensability. They understand that attacks on one segment of the workforce, through layoffs, wage reductions, or exploitation, threaten all, and that defense must be collective to be effective. The consciousness of shared interest transforms laborers from passive participants in their own exploitation into active agents of change, capable of challenging not only immediate injustices, but also the structural foundations that allow such injustices to persist. Capitalist institutions recognize this threat and have historically sought to dismantle collective organization through legislation, surveillance, co-optation, and intimidation. Yet the persistence of unions, workers' movements, and grassroots organizing demonstrates the enduring capacity of labor to assert itself, even in the face of formidable resistance. Every collective action, every cell surface, protest, or unionization effort is a manifestation of the inherent truth that the laboring class possesses the ultimate leverage in society. The strength of capital is contingent, conditional, and dependent upon the compliance of those who produce value. When laborers unite, the illusion of inevitability surrounding exploitation is shattered and the balance of power shifts. Solidarity also amplifies the reach of knowledge and consciousness, allowing workers to share experiences, analyze systemic patterns of exploitation, and strategize for transformative action. It connects isolated struggles, builds networks of resistance, and cultivates a culture in which collective empowerment becomes both practical and ideological. Through solidarity, the working class transcends the limitations imposed by fear, division, and internalized inferiority, transforming labor from a site of extraction into a force for justice, equity, and social reconstruction. The capitalist system can only function when labor is fragmented, distracted, and fearful. Yet organization and solidarity expose the structural dependency that capital has on the laboring majority. It is in this recognition that the revolutionary potential of the working class is revealed. For when individuals act together with purpose, coordination, and mutual support, they become capable of challenging not only immediate conditions of exploitation, but the broader social, economic, and political structures that perpetuate inequality. Solidarity turns fear into confidence, weakness into strength, and dispersed labor into a coherent force capable of asserting rights, demanding fair compensation, and envisioning alternative social orders. Collective organization, therefore, is both the weapon and the armor of the working class, a tangible manifestation of the inherent power of those who produce wealth to resist subjugation, to challenge inequality, and to transform society according to principles of justice, equity, and human dignity. It is through solidarity that laborers uncover their indispensability, confront the myth of disposability, and assert control over the conditions of their lives, demonstrating that exploitation is neither natural nor inevitable, but contingent upon the fragmentation of those whose collective strength has the potential to reshape the world. Recognizing your indispensability is the first step toward revolutionary action, for it is the awakening of consciousness to the fundamental truth that the system which seeks to dominate you is dependent upon your labor, your energy, and your coordinated effort. In capitalism, the illusion of replaceability is a central tool of control, convincing workers that their absence, their resistance, or their collective assertion would make no difference. that the machinery of production and profit would continue unimpeded regardless of their contribution. Yet every economic calculation, every industrial process, every service delivered is rooted entirely in human effort. To recognize one's indispensability is to pierce the veil of this illusion, to see the structural dependency that capital has on the very people it subjugates. It is the moment when fear, nurtured by years of ideological conditioning, begins to dissolve and is replaced by an understanding of latent power. Workers are taught to measure their value only in terms of the wages they receive, the hours they can sustain, or the efficiency with which they perform. And yet this narrow measure conceals the broader reality that society, commerce, and the accumulation of wealth are impossible without their contributions. Every individual, no matter how seemingly minor in the hierarchy of production, is a node in a vast network of interdependent labor, and the withdrawal of even a portion of this effort exposes the vulnerability of the capitalist system. Recognizing indispensability is not merely a personal realization, but a collective insight. When one worker understands that they are essential, the next step is to connect this recognition with others, to see that the shared indispensability of laborers across workplaces, industries, and regions constitutes a force capable of asserting power over the conditions of work, distribution, and wealth. Consciousness of indispensability transforms labor from a passive, alienated activity into a locus of potential revolt, a foundation upon which solidarity and organization can be built. The worker who perceives their true role in society begins to see that their suffering, their exploitation, and their marginalization are not accidents or natural consequences of individual inadequacy, but deliberate mechanisms maintained to suppress the collective potential of the laboring majority. This understanding fuels revolutionary thought, for it reveals that power does not reside solely in capital, political institutions, or the rhetoric of the ruling class, but in the organized capacity of those who sustain the system. Historical struggles of labor reveal this truth repeatedly. Strikes halt production, slowdowns disrupt markets, and collective bargaining shifts the balance of power, demonstrating that when workers assert their indispensability, they assert control over the social and economic structures that depend upon them. Recognizing indispensability also dissolves the internalized fear that keeps workers fragmented. Capitalism depends on the laboring class seeing themselves as replaceable, as transient and peripheral. Once this perception is challenged, confidence grows, and with confidence comes the capacity to organize, to demand, and to resist. The recognition that one's labor is essential, undermined. In us, the very ideology that maintains subjugation, creating the conditions for collective action, for coordinated strategies that protect rights, secure fair compensation, and challenge systemic exploitation. Indispensability is both a shield and a weapon. It protects against the psychological manipulation of fear and disposability, and it arms the worker with the awareness that withdrawal of labor, protest, or organized resistance can have profound consequences on the functioning of the capitalist order. As this consciousness spreads among workers, the potential for transformative action escalates. Individuals who once felt powerless begin to perceive the structural leverage inherent in their collective role, understanding that the systems of wealth accumulation, production, and distribution are contingent upon their efforts. Revolutionary action is not merely an abstract ideal, but a material possibility rooted in the undeniable truth of indispensability. Recognizing one's indispensability also inspires a shift from defensive to proactive strategies. It encourages workers to unite across divisions of skill, race, gender, and occupation, building networks that amplify the power of collective labor. It fosters an understanding that exploitation is not inevitable, and that systemic change requires coordinated effort, organization, and the assertion of collective rights. The moment of recognition transforms consciousness. The worker moves from self-doubt to self-awareness, from passivity to agency, from alienation to empowerment. It is the spark that ignites solidarity. That motivates the formation of unions, councils, committees, and other structures that channel indispensable labor into a force capable of demanding social, economic, and political transformation. Indispensability, once recognized, becomes inseparable from responsibility. The responsibility to act not only for oneself, but for the collective, to convert awareness into action and to challenge the structures that exploit and marginalize. Through this recognition, the worker begins to see that every act of labor, every contribution to society carries inherent power, and that when wielded collectively, this power can confront oppression, redistribute wealth, and reshape the conditions of human life. In essence, recognizing indispensability is the threshold of revolution, the point at which fear gives way to knowledge, isolation gives way to solidarity, and exploitation encounters the organized strength of those whose labor sustains the world. It is the foundational realization upon which consciousness, action, and ultimately transformation are built, revealing that the power to change society lies not with capital, but with the laboring majority who make all value and social wealth possible. Comrades, we have traced the hidden architecture of a system that pretends to need us while treating us as expendable. We have seen how fear of disposability fragments our strength, how our labor, the true source of all value, is systematically appropriated, and how only through collective organization and solidarity can we confront exploitation. Recognizing our indispensability is not a mere idea. It is a call to action, a spark that ignites consciousness, courage, and the capacity to reshape society itself. The ruling class thrives on our self-doubt, our isolation, and our acceptance of a hierarchy that devalues our work. But history, material reality, and the power inherent in organized labor tell another story. The system cannot function without us. Our hands build its wealth, our minds sustain its innovation, and our unity can dismantle its oppression. Let us no longer accept the lie of replaceability. Let us seize the truth of our indispensability, join together in solidarity, and wield the collective strength that has always been ours. For when the working class understands its power, when we act as one, the foundations of exploitation tremble, and a society of justice, equality, and human dignity becomes not a dream, but a material possibility within our grasp. Rise, organize, and act, for the world we create through our labor can finally belong to those who sustain it.